So about 2 months ago, I made a video going over my thoughts on Sonic Superstars before it was released. In that video, I brought up a lot of different stuff, some of which I already covered in my actual review video of the game, but I wanted to revisit that video now that Sonic Superstars is finally out, and I want to see if Sonic Superstars actually was great for Classic Sonic. I won't be going over anything I previously covered, but I will be revisiting points from my Sonic Superstars is great for Classic Sonic video, so feel free to go watch that if you haven't already. But of course, I'll be explaining everything in this video as well, so it isn't entirely necessary. The first thing I brought up in that video were the characters in Sonic Superstars, specifically the main 7 shown off in all the promo art. When I made that first video, it wasn't known that Trip would actually be a playable character. If anything, Fang was more suspected to be the 5th playable character, but instead we got Trip, which I'm actually pretty happy with, because it made sense in terms of the story, and I also like her gameplay and design. Trip works in Sonic Superstars simply just because she's the reward you get for completing the main story, but also just as a new character in the Classic Sonic side of the universe. As much as I wish they would bring characters like Mighty, Ray, Fang, and Trip into the modern Sonic games, I don't really expect it to happen anytime soon. Having new characters appear in classic games and be playable is always a plus for replayability, but since most modern Sonic characters wouldn't really work in any of the classic Sonic games without severely breaking the continuity of their first appearances, getting new characters instead is probably the best middle ground we can achieve when it comes to the classic Sonic games. Of course, I would have liked Fang to be playable as well, but who knows, maybe that'll be part of Sonic Superstars Plus or something. So I think Trip's inclusion in the game allows for the villains to have a nice mini character arc, even if it was pretty obvious, and it also makes more sense to have her as the game's 5th playable character. So back to how this all ties into the question, do the characters of Sonic Superstars help make it great? Well, I think it's kinda obvious, but yes, definitely. Most classic Sonic games have 3 playable characters on launch. That includes Mania and Origins, since their Plus DLCs weren't part of the base game, so I want to be fair in comparison to Superstars here. But immediately having 4 characters confirmed right off the bat was a huge win for the game, and then on top of that having a 5th unlockable character means that this classic Sonic game has the most amount of characters on launch. So yeah, the characters absolutely helped contribute towards this game being great, but the characters are only one piece of the puzzle. So now let's move on to the zones of Sonic Superstars and see if they made this game great or not. I think right off the bat, it's pretty important to get across just how big of an announcement it was that Sonic Superstars would have all completely new zones and level themes. The only Sonic game in the past 11 years to also have completely original zones was Sonic Lost World. And I'm talking about mainline games here, so no, the Boom game spin-offs don't count, because who actually played Rise of Lyric anyway? So yeah, getting completely new and original zones and level themes was definitely a huge win for Sonic Superstars. Now I know a lot of these are very similar to previous level themes, at least in title, but no actual level here is a direct copy or reuse of a previous game's style or layout. Which is a little sad that I'm so excited about saying that, but things have been rough, and hey, Superstars is hopefully laying the groundwork for future games to follow in its footsteps. Not literally, like don't reuse things from Superstars, but you know what I mean. Zones like Press Factory, Pinball Carnival, and Lagoon City all sound similar in name to previous classic Sonic zones, but almost every zone in this game, besides maybe Bridge Island Zone, has a different gimmick that sets it apart pretty distinctly from its predecessor, so I don't really think the names being similar is anything to get upset over. Plus, Pinball Carnival may be a carnival level, but have you seen the second act? Way different than most other carnival levels in Sonic games, and especially classic Sonic ones. So I think the zones in this game were a W in my book. And of course, all that being said, do the zones in Sonic Superstars actually make the game great? Well, again, like the characters, the answer is a pretty obvious yes. There may be an annoying zone or two in here, but it's pretty hard to argue that the zones in Sonic Superstars aren't good. They're the meat of the game. Having fun zones to play through is pretty important to the enjoyment of classic Sonic games, so trust me, I'd be a lot more harsh on them if they weren't also fun to play through. Having unique level theming and design is one thing, but being fun to play through is what really matters, and the zones in Sonic Superstars definitely hit the mark. Maybe not a perfect bullseye, but they definitely hit the target. Now for a topic that I admittedly don't have much experience in, the multiplayer. I have seen some co-op playthroughs, and I have played a bit of the battle mode, so I think I'll at least talk about it. The multiplayer in Sonic Superstars feels like somewhat of an afterthought, but also doesn't at the same time. I think Arzest designed the level layouts and designed the game to be played in multiplayer from the beginning, but the actual multiplayer system in the game seems like it was either unfinished or not fully thought out when they pitched it as an idea. There's just a lot of design challenges that come up when making multiplayer for a game where you fly across the screen super fast, but I think they at least gave it a decent enough try. Now when I say that, I don't mean that the implementation of this solution was necessarily all that good. Most of the playthroughs I've seen usually have some questionable multiplayer moments where the game decides who to follow, seemingly at random, but I think for a Sonic game, it was at least a serviceable solution. That doesn't mean I'm defending the bugginess of it, and to be fair, I'm commenting on something that I've only seen and haven't actually played, but having the game be split screen, I just don't think would have worked all that well. If you think about how Sonic levels are structured, you could easily have players that are either just less experienced or more inclined to explore and get left behind while other players move on and beat the level or interact with other things in the stage, which actually goes both ways. Imagine someone regularly playing the level and someone far behind them decides to head into a special stage. It isn't really fair to the player far ahead to get sucked all the way back into a special stage, and it wouldn't make sense to have one person be in a special stage while the other isn't. So I just don't think that split screen co-op would have worked all that well. I think the other solution that could have worked would have been that the camera always follows player 1. I can see both pros and cons as to how this solution compares to the one that they went with, but I think having any player become the focus depending on how far they are makes for a more enjoyable experience if you're playing with friends, even though it does get to be very finicky and overall not super reliable. For online multiplayer, which is the battle mode, I don't really expect this to be alive for longer than a few months, if even that. Most online Sonic games don't usually have thriving communities, even the ones built around online play like the racing games, so for this online side mode that isn't the main focus of the game, yeah, I don't see it being anything anyone actually talks about. It's nothing great either. Definitely feels like they just wanted an online multiplayer mode, and this was all they could make in their limited time. So the quality probably reflects the amount of time that was put into this mode, which I don't think was all too much. Unless you count all the cosmetics, cause I'm sure those took a bit of time to make. So does the multiplayer in Sonic Superstars make the game great? Well, no, not really. The implementation could have been a lot better, and maybe it will be in the future, after some patches, but for right now, I don't think the multiplayer experience of Sonic Superstars is really anything to get excited about or claim was great for the game. One thing that I was particularly excited for in my previous video were the Emerald Powers, and I did go over these in my review video, so I'm keeping this part very brief. The Emerald Powers in Sonic Superstars were, I think, a pretty nice innovation to the classic Sonic gameplay, and while they may not have been as useful as I was hoping for, I do think the game is better because of their inclusion. Most of the boss fights in Superstars probably would have been a lot more annoying without the Emerald Powers, so if anything, I'm at least thankful for them because of those. I was hoping for them to maybe be on a cooldown, not a one-time use that refills when you pass a checkpoint, but I guess balancing them would have been a lot harder then. All of the levels can of course be completed without the use of any Emerald Powers, but those moments where I did realize that I could use one in a level was a fun and rewarding moment that made you think about how you could use more of them within the zones. So are the Emerald Powers great for Sonic Superstars? Well yeah, I think they are. They could have had a bit more usefulness throughout general gameplay, but for what they are, I think they're pretty neat. They maybe aren't on the same level of innovation as the Drop Dash was, which literally became a mainstay ability for both classic and modern Sonic, but the gameplay's a lot more fun and smooth with them than without them. And now, for a more spicy debate question, which if I'm being honest, I don't really care too much about, but I'll talk about it anyways. Should Sonic Superstars have been a classic Sonic game, or could modern Sonic have been here instead? Well, I think classic Sonic games feel a lot different than modern Sonic ones, plus we've seen how a 2D only modern Sonic game goes, but I guess that's an unfair comparison since Superstars was made by a different studio. But I'm gonna pull from my previous video here and say that I think modern Sonic has evolved far beyond the gameplay style that Superstars was trying to create. So having him be here probably would have started a different argument as to why modern Sonic wasn't just boosting through the levels and using his homing attack. I think classic and modern Sonic just play differently, which is a problem entirely created by Sega, and maybe in a different universe wouldn't have been, but classic and modern Sonic are definitely their own characters now at this point in the Sonic franchise. And I don't mean that classic Sonic is a different Sonic, he's still just a younger modern Sonic, but what I mean is that their characterization and gameplay styles are just too different from each other now, which is partly why Sonic Generations even worked in the first place, and kickstarted the whole 3D classic Sonic stuff. So could Sonic Superstars have been a modern Sonic game? Well, I guess there isn't anything stopping it from being one, but like I said previously, at this point Classic Sonic isn't going anywhere, so keeping their gameplay identities separate, and now with Superstars, even more defined, I think this is probably the best we could ask for. So what does that have to do with Superstars being great for Classic Sonic? Well, I think it's great for him because it diversifies his gameplay and gives him a legitimate reason for existing outside of nostalgia bait, even if that was probably the original intended purpose for this game's creation. Now with all that being said, is Sonic Superstars great for classic Sonic now that I've actually gotten to play it? Well, 4 out of the 5 points that I brought up here said yes, so I think it's pretty fair to say that Superstars was great for classic Sonic. Now don't misunderstand me when I say that though, I'm not saying it's a great game, because it definitely has its faults, and it honestly doesn't rank higher than Mania or Sonic 3 and Knuckles for me, But what I mean is that the game is great for Classic Sonic as a character, as an identity. This game should be the basis that any future Classic Sonic games are made from, and if you think there won't be any more in the future, then I hate to tell you, but that would be very unlikely. So again, using this game as a template, a platform, a jumping off point for any future Classic Sonic games is what makes it great for Classic Sonic. Thanks for watching until the end of the video. I wasn't originally planning on making a video like this, but after trying to think of some video ideas for Sonic Superstars, this one seemed like a pretty obvious choice as a follow-up to my first Superstars video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in more Sonic Superstars content or Sonic content in general, because I've got a lot of that on here and coming soon. And of course, I'll see you next time.